Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 34. I recently spoke with Jared Brandt and Connor Bockman of Donkey and Goat Winery. Jared is, of course, one of the founders of the winery, and Connor is the winemaker. Located in Berkeley, California, the winery celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. The natural wine landscape in California has changed a lot since Donkey and Goat started. We discuss some of these things that have changed, how the winery got started, the growers they work with, and how they keep the winery fresh after 20 years. You'll hear my discussion with Jared and then with Connor after. You can hear a little bit of preparation for a First Friday event and the background at times, and also a train once or twice just to remind you that it is an urban winery. Here we go.
In 2001, I decided to leave technology and I wanted to do something totally different. And I had a Chateauneuf-du-Pape Blanc from Eric Texier. I contacted Joe Dresner. Joe introduced me to Eric. Went and visited Eric a few weeks later and moved to France a few weeks later.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
It was a very quick change.
Okay. Did you have in mind that you wanted to start the winery?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I was tired of technology. And I just wanted a year-long sabbatical is what I really wanted. I had made, for a very brief point in time, a lot of money in an IPO, but that company went private and I lost all that money.
Okay.
But I also sold a house in San Francisco, so I had enough money that I could spend a year doing something totally different. And that's what I really wanted to do. I also wanted to make something real. Like, software is not real. I always use maybe a super negative example, but if there's a nuclear blast, pretty much all software will stop working because all circuits will explode, or I don't know exactly the right word. And so I wanted to make something real. And I got that with my kids too. Like, my daughter has seen the first product I product managed was After Dark Screensaver. And like, I have, 5.25-inch floppy disks, and they're like, look at those, and they're like, what is that?
Yeah.
So
just a year-long sabbatical, do something with your hands, like
make something real. And then
something real.
And then what happened next is I went with my then girlfriend who was going to learn cheese making. She ended up not doing that. And now I can say she's my ex-wife. Actually, I can't even really say that. We've been separated for 4 years.
Okay.
But at some point, we'll be my ex-wife. And she fell in love with winemaking too. Eric was great to work for. It was very hands-on experience. It was doing a little of everything. Like, his original website we built for him, but mostly vineyard work and cellar work. And, working with importers, which was a really good experience. And then it was one of the things about owning a small business, probably in general, but a small winery, is it's a real diversification of skills. Like, winemaking is one of the things you do, but there's a lot of operational things like ordering bottles, getting your labels approved. In France, getting the right export label on the, because the U.S. has a different back label for imported wines than Denmark had and that Germany had. And then, making sure you get paid by people. There's all those things, and that made it a really interesting business versus technology, where it tends to be very focused on one thing. So came back, and 2003 made wine in this guy named Michael Brill's basement. Was living in San Francisco. Michael Brill started Crushpad as a result of that process. He always wanted to learn how to make wine. He loved wine. And so 2004, we made wine at Crushpad in San Francisco, but not as a custom crush client, just as an AP client, used their space. 2005, we made wine there, but moved right after harvest, if I remember correctly, or maybe right beginning of 2006. Okay. The business grew organically, very slow. For many years, we sold more wine in Europe than we did in California. California was a really hard market for us to break into because natural wine didn't effectively exist, period, worldwide. Like, no one was using that terminology. And then in California, at that point, people were very interested in very high alcohol, highly extracted wines, and which is still a trend. I mean, I don't know a trend anymore, but still part of the market segment. And then you have on the other side, Chardonnay drinkers who wanted an oaky, buttery Chardonnay with, 20 grams residual sugar. And that was not our style. So business grew from there. Reached a first distributor was Martin Scott, which no longer exists in New York. They contacted me February 18th, 2005. And I remember that day very well because it's also the day my daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
My oldest daughter,
That's an exciting day.
Yeah, it was a very exciting day. And Noah Bass, who now is a little bit in the wine business, but he's more or less retired. He reached out and he said, your name is Donkey Goat and my name is Noah. We have like a perfect fit. And that's how that relationship started. And that's how the business really got going. Moved to Berkeley at our old location for, I don't remember, till 2011. Mm-hmm. It was a smaller location, didn't have a tasting room. And then in 2011, we had partially outgrown the space, which is still a winery over there. And we had neighbors that were not really interested in letting us have a tasting room and were difficult to deal with. And so we found the space that you're in right now. When we first saw it, you can look over, and for your listeners, you can't see it. There's a wall with glass windows. All but like 4 panes are pretty clean, and the 4 panes that are really dirty are the only ones that weren't broken out when we first saw it.
Okay.
This was a very disastrous, had been left to ruin site for a long time, but my landlord did a great job redeveloping it, and we've been here since.
Nice. Was it a paint?
This was Flint ink. They had the patent on magnetic ink, which if you see checks when they go through it goes through a magnetic ink reader. I always wondered how they worked because it's clearly not optical, but it looks like it's an optical reader. But in this particular space right now, where we are now, they made varnish. So it was a varnish reactor room, it was called. And the reason it's all concrete is it was designed to withstand a small explosion from within.
Okay.
But the beauty of that is that we don't have huge temperature fluctuations.
Right.
The concrete it does eventually heat up and it does get cold, but it takes a long time to swing. And we do have a night air system, which we rarely use, but we don't actually have very much temperature control here. Mm-hmm. But we're close enough to the bay that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you're a couple stones throws from the bay, pretty close. Yep. So, what were some of the wines that you started out with those first couple years?
That's, you're gonna test my memory. 2004, we had Vidmar, the 2004 release. So it would be released in 2005. Vidmar Syrah, which is a vineyard in the Yorkville Highlands that had just been grafted from Zin to Syrah. We had McDowell Valley Old Vine Syrah, which we worked with for a couple of years after that. We lost Vidmar almost immediately to a wealthier winery with good lawyers and nobody we wanted to fight with. And then we had the first 2 years we made Carson Ridge Syrah, which is a vineyard very close to Goldbud and Fanati, which we've worked with since then. Brousseau Chardonnay, which was Chardonnay grown on limestone down south. And I think that's about it. So when we first started, Tracy made the whites, I made the reds, and that kind of everything else we worked on together. But over the course of time, we didn't do that. I think to a certain extent, I became much more interested in whites. I don't know if we'll talk about it, but I left the winery for a few years. And I during that few years, I ended up drinking mainly classical whites, like almost exclusively. Like a lot of Chablis, a lot of Italian varietal whites, a lot of white Burgundy when I can afford it, which is not all that often. So that kind of changed, but that's how we originally divided the labor.
Mm-hmm. Did you was there kind of an overarching goal when you started the winery?
Yeah, we wanted to make terroir-driven wines was the original goal with minimal intervention. So having worked for Eric Texier, Eric is often said to be a nuclear engineer, which is totally untrue. He's a material scientist, carbon fiber specialist. And his worldview of wine is he likes higher acidity, mineral-driven wines, but he likes to make them as without a little as intervention as possible. Was I think the goal of letting the terroir speak for itself, and that was the original goal. Typically, at the time, what would be considered really low alcohol wines when a bland wine was considered 14.5 because it didn't have enough alcohol, and we were down in the 12s, people are like, this doesn't even taste like wine. But that wasn't really like, that was just kind of an outgrowth of our taste. Grapes ripen, you lose acidity. So if you wait till they, naturally produce 15 or 16% alcohol, there's almost no acidity left. And then you add something to make up for the acidity. We weren't interested in doing that.
That was kind of one of, I feel like, the earliest stories about the winery was the verjus for the Chardonnay, which I feel like it'd be remiss not to ask about.
I give you, it was like I give you a ton of credit on your research, but so if you go back historically, how did people acidify wine? And like even in like warm, cool climate areas on warm years, people get fearful of acidity. So one of the kind of old school methods, or ancient, I don't even know if ancient, historical methods, is that you would do 2 harvests. You'd do a harvest for verjus, so you pick, particularly Chardonnay, like you can pick really young, and actually I think it tastes good. It doesn't taste right, but it tastes good. So we would pick Chardonnay, I think at around 5 or 6 or 7 bricks, something really low, right before veraison really started. Really biting acidity, and then we would press it. We had a basket press, so it was super inefficient. And then we would always try to figure out ways to store it. We typically would put it into beer kegs and put it into a cold storage meat locker in Oakland. And then when we did the main harvest, we would pick it again and use the 2 as a blend to come up with the right acidity. We sustained a lot of criticism for this, mostly from people who did not taste the wine. Or maybe exclusively from people who did not taste the wine. The one I remember most was a winemaker who I have long since lost touch with, Adam Lee at Siduri, but Siduri is now owned by Kendall Jackson, and I have no idea what Adam Lee's doing anymore. But Adam made the comparison, it was like peeing into wine to add salt. No, peeing into soup to add salt.
Okay. That's a hell of a...
Because we didn't know exactly what we were putting in. And of course, he had never tasted the wine, and I knew him. And I would, it was kind of revealing of a lot of the culture of wine in California, where people felt they had knowledge, which they mistook opinion for fact. And then they also mistook, they weren't open to other ideas. And so there was a big controversy over doing that. But people, like some people didn't like the wine. They didn't like the acid level in the wine. Some people love the wine. Last time I opened a Brousseau, it was great. The old, sadly he's passed away, but the wine buyer at Chez Panisse, like, would often buy old cases for us for downstairs, for the wine list for downstairs there, because he loved it. So I think it was just a different way to add something back in. Times have changed, and now if you talk to someone about doing that now, they would think you're a genius. But the wine business is cyclical, so it probably will go back to saying, oh, you can only add acid that you buy from China in a large bag if you want to acidify your wines.
So you guys were really one of the early kind of natural wineries in California, and does it feel like there was much infrastructure kind of for the wineries at that time, or like people to ask or run things by? Like you're probably a little out in the woods for a minute there, but how has it changed over? It's been about 20 years, I guess.
This is our 20th anniversary harvest this year, so we're gonna have a big party maybe in October, like during harvest, to say 20 years of picking grapes. It's totally changed. When we first started, like we would get criticized. People wouldn't know what to make of us. Thought it was, I got all sorts of negative comments. And then, years later, now it's a very different world. Like, taught a lot of people how to make pet nat the way we make it. And I don't know if taught's the right word, but I've explained what we do. And I know people have used variations of our processes. But now it's a totally different, like this summer, I was lucky enough to find myself in the Hamptons, and I talked to my friend Christopher Smith, who I've talked to on the email and text many times, but we went and talked together. But he's been making wines effectively in that same vein for the last, 15 years. And like, there's people that have experience that have tried things. So I think there's a lot more there now. I think the difference now is there's probably a fair amount of people that are very dogmatic about natural wines. And there's people who say that, like, they give definitions that I don't think you can give. I'll give you the easiest example is people talk about biodynamic wine. I'm not sure. You read Rudolf Steiner, he says you can't drink. So if you believe in what he says, then there's probably, you can't make biodynamic wine. But people get dogmatic about it now. And I'm just like, I don't quite get it. So I think it's really changed. And then there's just a lot more people to talk to and a lot more people experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Donkey and Goat Pet Nat was the first California one I can remember. I don't know if there was one before.
It was one of the very first ones made in America. I don't know that for a fact. The first release was the 2011. I started experimenting with it a couple of years before that. Lou, formerly of Lou's Wine Bar, and I don't remember the name of his wine shop now, of LA, pushed me to make it. But at the time, there was no one that I knew of that was making Pet Nat in America. Andre Kalec gave us a lot of information via email. He used to make a wine called Blonde in the Ardèche in France. But yeah, there wasn't anyone out there. I actually thought that Channing Daughters maybe had made one before us, but when Christopher and I talked, we have them beat by a couple of years. And again, that's an easy wine. It's named Lily's, the original one, and Lily is my 12-year-old who's about to turn 13 on March 10th.
Yeah, I remember having the first. I have a son that's 12, and I had the first one like when he was born.
And it was the original release. We didn't disgorge it, and we sold it with instructions from my older daughter.
The cardboard tube.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. I used to have a copy of those instructions because we used to include instructions for my daughter that had drawn how to open it. And like Movia, we just assumed you could open it yourself. This year we're toying with the idea of maybe a re-release where it's not disgorged.
Okay.
So
throwback.
Yeah. I would love to. You know, the wines. It's this harvest that will be the re-release, but you probably have known the winery long enough to know the original label that Jane Fisher and Colin Frangos designed, which was like a cutout of a goat and a donkey, and it was at the time it was a hard label. Made a wine with a hard name that didn't fit typical California, probably harder to sell, and now I think it would be considered very hip. We'll see.
Yeah, you had to get your tub of water for those Pet Nats.
Yes, they were explosive.
Can you tell me about some of your vineyard sources that you've worked with over the years? It seems like you guys have a lot of long-term relationships with growers. You've worked with the Mansfields for a long time, I think. And
Ron and Chuck and their mom, whose name I'm going to blank on right now. We've worked with for a long time. So we met Ron in 2005, and Chuck is running the vineyards and the vineyard operation now. I like vineyards where you have a lot of control over the work. And I'm not a micromanager. I'm not looking to control the vineyard per se. But I'm looking for someone who respects our goals. And Ron was very easy for us to work with and would take chances on us. He planted Claret at the Barsotti vineyard, and the old Oxford Dictionary on Grapes, I believe it's called, had an incorrect description of Claret, and he like photocopied it and faxed it to me, and he's like, "Are you sure you want to plant this? Are you really going to buy it?" And he took the risk, and it worked out great for him because he had a waiting list. I don't know if he still does for people for that grape, but he was willing to do kind of a long-term relationship. The best relationships in our business have always been handshakes. And so we have like newer relationships that when I left, before I came back, I started working with Fiano and Greco that my friend Jake had planted for me. And, it was a handshake, and Donkey Goat will be releasing those next year. And it's it's a long-term relationship. The business itself takes a while. I think there's two factors that people forget. One, unlike technology, if you want to do an experiment, you got to wait another year to even see if you can replicate it. And then you have all the variables. There's so many variables that it's multifaceted every year on your experiments. And then on top of all of that, it just takes a long time for a vineyard to come. Like if you plant a vineyard, you got 3 years before you get the first grapes. And then at year 10, it's very different than it is at year 3. And at year 20, it's different than it was at year 10, just like your kids. And on top of all of that, I think you need like 10 years in a vineyard before you actually begin to understand it. It just takes a while because, weather varies. And like after 10 years, it'll be like something like the weather, whatever the weather will be that year, you'll be like, well, it's kind of like this year. And then, you kind of have an idea of what to do. Raymond Trolet, who was a great winemaker in San Joseph, told me he got it right twice. And I think he made like 60 vintages from the same vineyard. So I think there's a lot of learning that I had from that comment.
There's a lot more wines that the Donkey and Goat make now. A real large percentage of them are still vineyard designated wines, or if not, then maybe it's a small region, El Dorado, where the vineyards are, two plots down from
one another. Yeah. Or we work with Calera and Stiletto Vineyard, which is this, as far as I'm concerned, the exact same vineyard. Two different purchases by the same family. Yeah, I think, going forward, we're going to do a little bit more Lodi. Because I've, stepping away from the business for a couple of years and then just making the wine for my friend had planted for me, from the grapes that he had planted for me. I discovered I really liked Lodi, actually. Like, you get really high, like big diurnal swings, so you keep your acidity. Obviously, you need to plant it right. Like, I don't think Pinot Noir from Lodi is going to be anything I would ever make. But, so we're going to start doing more of that. We'll continue with Goldbud and Fanati, the Bear and Eliza, and Stone Crusher, which is from another vineyard called Ellen Ridge. We are starting at some other projects. Like Connor, who's the winemaker here now, is there's no going to. We're managing our own Pinot Noir vineyard near Sebastopol, kind of up. We don't own it, but it's it's like, I call them pocket vineyards, but they're, it was a hobby vineyard for another winemaker who moved back to New York, and the person who bought the property is a friend, and he was very generous to allow us to start managing it ourselves. So I'm hoping the whole tasting room staff will get their fingernails dirty.
Very cool, yeah.
And their earth, yeah. And then there's like other long-term, like we've been working with the Ramato for the Ramato Pinot Gris since 2014. So there's going to be some evolution in these coming years, but there's also going to be some old standbys. The vineyard designates is becoming a little harder for us because of the challenge is once you get a high score, we let guest pourers pour here on Thursday nights. We had lucky to have a winery here called Stolen Owl, which I don't know if you've ever had their wines.
I haven't.
I had never had them before last night, and I thought they were quite delicious. But they're getting some high scores, and then the challenge is you get a score, and then they are not vineyard designated. I think it may be for other reasons, but then someone will come swoop in and try to take it from you and outbid you. And in the wine business, there's plenty of people with really deep pockets.
Yeah, it's that's a shame, but it seems like it's fairly common. You're not the first one I've.
No, it's. I mean, I know that from someone in Sicily. I know that from someone in the Jura. That like. Once you become known for something, you risk someone outbidding you unless you own it. And then, even like generationally, even if you own it, your kids might be like, I'd rather, pocket the money from selling the land than continue this tradition.
Yeah. Have you guys dipped your toes into farming previously?
A little bit. We managed a vineyard in Anderson Valley for a few years. And that didn't work for us, but a big part of it is just too far.
Yeah.
It's a long drive. And it was the deep end of the valley.
Okay.
And it was probably at least 25 minutes from Philo, which is the nearest hardware store. So whatever you forgot, you had another hour to, round trip to go get. And I would love to, in the future, manage a small vineyard, but probably not in the United States. Like, I have my dreams of another country.
Okay.
So,
yeah, deep end of the Anderson Valley is a bit far from here. I mean, that's a spending the night situation or a real long day.
It was a long day. I had a Prius at the time, and I remember passing very fancy cars on 128 because I knew that road backwards and forwards, and I would be in a hurry. It's just hard. And like, I would have friends who go up there. We had bear problems there, among other things. Bears would get in the vineyards and eat the grapes, and like, a friend would be going up to Anderson Valley and I'd give them like drop a pin and tell them how to get there via Google Maps. And they'd be like, yeah, there's a big hole in the fence. And like, there's a lot of what looks like poop with grape seeds in it. And I'm like, oh, that's a bear.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't react fast enough. So like it didn't work. I think the vineyard that we're going to do now is much smaller and it's Sebastopol. So, with no traffic from my house, I can get there in less than an hour.
Okay.
And it's small enough that we're not using an outside like vineyard crews. We're not using someone else to do the work. We're going to do it ourselves. I don't subscribe to the idea that you have to own the vineyard. Like there's journalists who have their dogmatic rules on how great wine is made, and I just don't subscribe to that. But I think that said, I would love to do it for a few years.
I wanted to ask you about the wine relocating to Berkeley. At the time, I'm not sure who else was here. I mean, there's the spot down the street that's kind of been a winery over the years, like at Edmund St. John, and now
before that,
Lusu, and I know Brock's been over there.
Leaky Lake Cellars.
Leaky Lake, that's one I forgot. But
Leaky Lake's their cab was a genius. Their Napa cab was one of the probably top 20 California bottlings I've ever had. There was at the time we moved over here, it was before Brock. Actually, I think it started as a winery, but it was Grape Leaf Cellars. Tom was there. And I think Edmund St. John was using that facility. And then there was Audubon Cellars, which is that building's been torn down, is now going to be a really big bio research lab.
Oh, okay.
It's on the far side of University from here. But there's been a long tradition of winemaking in Berkeley and in the East Bay. But we chose it just because we were starting a family and we needed more space. We, there's a couple like apocryphal, I don't know if that's the right word, but moments in our winemaking. We almost moved to El Dorado, and it probably would have changed the course of the winery pretty dramatically. But because of I always stayed in tech and was doing consulting, we always wanted to be in the Bay Area.
What are some of the kind of advantages and disadvantages to having a urban winery and Berkeley
hopefully no Berkeley city official will listen to this, but one of the beauties of Berkeley is when we started, they had no idea how to regulate wineries. So if you open a tasting room in Napa, you have a lot of requirements at the time. And I think it's still more or less that way. If you're zoned for manufacturing, you can use 10% of your space for your tasting room and retail in Berkeley. So there's a lot of common infrastructure things that are easier. You never have to deal with wastewater. We get to use East Bay Mud's wastewater system. And then Berkeley also had, I'm not going to blank on the name. There's the wine shop up on San Pablo.
The winemaking?
Yeah.
Oak Barrel.
Oak Barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's changed hands, but Oak Barrel, it's for hobbyists, but it actually, order regular winery equipment from them, but they also have a lot of spare parts and stuff. So we didn't have all the disadvantages of not being in Napa. I think one of the biggest disadvantages is when your press breaks during the middle of harvest. When we for many years used a hydraulic basket press. That's easy. You just find someone who knows how to repair forklifts and they can fix it. But when we switched to a much larger press with a bladder, the repair guys in Napa, and coming down here when they're you're going to be last on their call sheet, and what for anybody else might be a day-long wait for repair might be a week for us. So that's a challenge. Getting some just equipment stuff, it's much harder to get. We use sulfur candles in our barrels. I would probably, just during storage when they're empty, I don't know, I might use tank of sulfur instead, but that's actually more difficult to get here because it's not something that a gas supply company typically carries. And they want to sell it in a volume that's larger than we would need for the next 100 years. So that's going to be hard. You have to deal with traffic, getting the grapes. You have a little bit of a logistical challenge. East Bay is great, though, because we get plenty of, cool weather and fog. So we don't have the temperatures, it might get warm for 1 or 2 days during harvest here, but at the same time, and if you're up in Napa, it might be 100 for 10 of those days, and we might hit 90 once. So we have that advantage. A lot more customers that are close. We have I hear from a lot of my friends with wineries in Napa and Sonoma that their tasting room traffic was way down last year.
Okay.
Ours was not down at all. But we have a very different clientele. We don't have people coming from the East Coast often. Occasionally we do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people like live in the neighborhood and walk here.
Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of customers that are pretty close by, and it's kind of the block parties and
Yep.
and everything that sort of draw people.
Yeah, we
down to
do
the
first
area.
Fridays. Erin Callahan was my tasting room manager for many years, and she started it, I don't know, I think in 2016 or 17, and then with COVID they stopped. But then Josh at Hammerling Wines next door helped restart them out actually in the front after COVID, and now they're a huge hit. Like so crowded, it's hard to walk. But yeah, I think you get that gives us an advantage. And like we're doing things on Thursday nights, like we have guest wine pourers here, but like people from Oakland come in, people from who live in the neighborhood, like a few blocks away, come in. And you obviously, at least I don't have the kind of time that I could stop work an hour early and drive an hour and a half on Thursday night traffic to Napa and then taste some, I guess, winemaker's wine, then drive home. Like we don't so we have that advantage. And then the Bay Area is like, we have a lot of customers that are not consumers, but like restaurants that are close by. Like at the end of the day, the Bay Area is whatever, 15 million people or something. I don't know, within 100 miles. So you have a huge population that, Sonoma and Napa aren't that far away, but I think it does make a difference. And El Dorado, it's a very different climate. Like you go up there and like the tasting rooms are more of a day-long destination. You can't just go on a Friday for First Friday.
Yeah, a little more out of the way. And one thing I always found interesting about you guys, you guys had the manifesto and kind of the no plastic winery and.
Because I always stayed with another livelihood. We had less economic pressure than most wineries. Not the people that made their billions in tech and then started a winery, but I taste plastic in wine really easily, so we never wanted to ferment in T-bins. And it's funny, like we let other people make wine here for Custom Crusher, and we do a lot of the winemaking, and they use T-bins, and I'm like, whatever. Like I'm not very judgy of it, but. We did not want the wine in plastic. We've always tried to be environmentally conscious, and like in a holistic way. You can be environmentally conscious, but then do things that, like, if you think about like the net impact, probably aren't very environmentally conscious. And that's one of the beauties of being here. I haven't read the manifesto in a while. I think some of that, as I said, I stepped away from the winery for a few years, and it became more. Particularly because of the forest fires in 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of what were labeled climate-driven wines, and that were not vineyard designate, not as terroir-driven. They're often the California AVA. But we're going to shift back to what I envisioned more, because I think that was part of it. And we've tried to stick true. Like the 2021 Ramato required a little acid adjustment, and we labeled it on the text sheet. And we skipped labeling the ingredients. I wasn't here for that decision, but I think it was the right decision. We like to put the labels on our ingredients, and we want to be accurate. And I'm not a fan. Like, I know plenty of people now who say no sulfur added, and I test the wines, and I'm like, I would think that all scientific indications there was an addition. Or people will say no sulfur added, and then there's a Swiss product that's made from mushrooms instead. And I'm like, I want all of our wines to be made with integrity. So like that was part of the manifesto originally.
Letting people know what they're getting and
where it's from. And, at some point we'll be able to redo the website, and I want to have more of a focus on our growers, because we have like great growers. Like the friend of mine in Lodi, he's growing for us, Jake DeVoyne. He's not certified organic, but he's among the most careful, organically oriented growers I know. He's experimenting with goats. He's experimenting with sheep. He's doing all sorts of things to experiment to have a lower environmental impact. And I can remember during the forest fires, there was nothing near Lodi, but there was smoke high up, and he's off the grid. His pump is powered by solar.
Okay.
And he wasn't able to irrigate because it wasn't sunny enough to get his pump to work. So like I want to celebrate those things where I can.
Yeah. Seems like thoughtfulness has a lot to do with it.
Yeah,
Caring.
I think it's thoughtfulness and not. I'm personally really interested in wines that are made from someone's, I don't know, like heart. Like Connor, who's the winemaker here now, and I talked a lot about like I want him to make the wines that he loves, as much as that I love. Like
Mhm.
I think that's where like wine gets really interesting, and where like wine is a personal or can be a personal expression of someone. And if you're not chasing someone else's desire, I think that's where you get really beautiful wines. So, like cloudy wines got in and people made intentionally cloudy wines. That's just not my thing. Like I would much rather have very clean wines. But if that was really your thing, then great. Like I just don't think I think there's a lot of trends in the wine business and they come and go. I recently an article there's been a couple of articles because orange wines are now really big, but there was maybe in 2012 thereabouts there was an article in Fortune magazine about how Tecate beer was better than orange wines. This is Richard Betts, who's now married to a friend of mine. And then he was poking fun, but like orange wines were beginning to be trendy, and then they weren't because of that article. And then now they're super trendy again. And people love orange wines that are making them. I think that's great, but I would hate to see someone, or maybe I should say it a different way. I think if someone's making an orange wine to chase a number, that the wine reflects that they're chasing a number.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that it's any different than like the natural wine movement has a big anti-Robert Parker philosophy, which I agree with their philosophy. You shouldn't make wine to one person's palate, but I think sometimes they make it to another person's palate, and I'm not sure that like that makes any more sense.
Okay. Just going so far the other
Well,
direction,
and
almost
like,
kind of back
yeah,
around.
and if a natural wine critic says you can only do these things and you do it, like how is that any different than Robert Parker saying you have to do these things and then doing it? Like to me, it seems like it's the same thing. It's a different dogmatic stance, but it's still a dogmatic stance. And I'm much more interested in people like I think I often you like think of the word soulful for wine, like people who are really doing their own thing and make wines for themselves. And I was curious, like I met a winery owner. It wasn't a winemaker in Paso Robles many years ago, and we went out to dinner, and he treated me to dinner. He was a super nice guy, and I was like, "Can we try your wine?" And he's like, "Oh, I think they're all bullshit. Let's drink this instead." And that's just like that was. I mean, he has a great business. I'm not actually even faulting him. It's just not that interesting for me.
What do you think is next for Donkey and Goat after 20 years in the
Yeah, I mean,
natural wine
we've gone
business?
through a lot of transitions. I left, more or less in 2020, and then completely in 21 until midway through 23. I want us to return to more terroir-driven wines. I think wines that taste of a place are super interesting to me. So you're gonna see a little bit more of that. After a couple of years off, we're gonna do a lot of the stuff in the foothills we used to do.
Okay.
And then we're going to we're gonna make fewer wines and try to make them better.
Okay.
Like I want to make wines like Connor. I don't want him to make a wine that he won't take to dinner.
Okay.
And I don't want a wine that like if someone says, "Hey, should I have this when I'm at I don't work in the tasting room very often, but when I'm hanging out in the tasting room, I don't want to have a wine that I say, no, you should have this instead because I don't think the wine's very good. So I think could definitely consider continuing with our going back to that manifesto, like trying to make them as this little intervention as possible, but within the context of like winemaking is in and of itself an intervention. Like
Sure.
if you make wine and leave it out and let it expose to oxygen, it not always, but generally will turn to vinegar. And then so I think maybe a little bit more classically driven. What I found myself drinking when I wasn't in Donkey and Goat, as I said before, I was like a lot of like classic Chablis, and I love those wines. And a lot of they're very famous Burgundy winemakers and very famous Chablis winemakers are actually natural, though they would never use that term. And I get it why they wouldn't, because they're making tons of money the way they're doing it. But that's kind of what we want to aspire to. So fewer wines, higher quality, trying to make sure our business is sustainable, and that we're able to offer a great product that makes people happy, and really focus. Like, part of the wine business is making people happy. I think sometimes people forget that in the wine business. Like, I want people to come to the tasting room and leave happier than when they came in.
That's great. Yeah.
We didn't talk about the materials. We can talk a little bit about that if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
If you look around here, we have some, I was going to say Rousseau tanks, but they're Tarzan. We have large fermentation vessels that are oak, French oak. I like oak a lot because it lets the wine breathe. I think a lot of reds can use some breathing during fermentation. Harder to maintain than stainless, which is their downside. But we also have in here concrete, which I think is, again, it offers a lot of natural insulation. It doesn't have near the amount of oxygen ingress that wood does. So I think it, again, will play with it. And then we have two other vessel types. We have it's called sandstone. I don't really know I don't know why they call it sandstone, because it's not made of sandstone, but maybe it's decomposed sandstone or something, but a Bordeaux vessel. And we've used that for different wines. I've actually used it for Chardonnay, and I think texturally it really adds to the Chardonnay. And then we have some Italian clay from Tuscany that's also very interesting. And I think all of them, like, goes back to why I was saying you need 10 years in a vineyard before you can really figure it out, because I think you need to experiment with the different fermentations. And I think there was just an article that someone was showing me last night about how if you play cheese different music, why it's I don't know the right word for cheese, why it's fermenting and aging. Right, have you seen this?
I've heard things about it, even with wine.
Yeah, well, this article
also,
says like hip hop makes the funkiest flavor in cheese.
Okay.
I don't know. I didn't actually read it, so I don't know if there's any truth to it. But I think there's a lot of wine production is nuance, and like finding the right nuances. So, you can use the extremes. Like, wood is really different than stainless steel for fermentation. And it's just because there's no oxygen getting into stainless steel other than at the top. Or if you're like, you might do a pump over. You might introduce oxygen, but if you don't do anything, it's only the surface of that area at the top that's going to get oxygen. Versus wood, where the whole thing is like a living, breathing vessel. And I think those nuances take time to understand, and then take time to fine tune. So what I always like to do in the past is if we had enough wine to do this, some years, like different vineyards, we don't have enough, but like do a lot of Grenache in the wood and do a lot of the Grenache in the concrete. And then next year, maybe do a lot of it whole cluster and then do a lot destemmed, so you can start to really see the differences. And then you can fine tune what you want to do. And then the challenge is every year it's different.
Yeah. But then, those years add up. Couple years of experimentation and different materials and destemming or whole cluster, and pretty soon you're at 10 years. So
oh, yeah. It adds up. And then you got, this 20th year anniversary. It's funny. I never thought about it until we were starting to talk about maybe we should go back to Rousseau vineyards this year and make I don't know if I've long lost touch with them. But or Carson Ridge, that vineyard's still there. I have no idea who gets the fruit. But I think those, it does add up, but it does take time. And I think that's like the time it's a very slow business. So.
What's the best place for people to get your wines and follow what you guys are up to, if they don't know?
Well, the website. I think coming into the taste room, I like First Fridays are great, and I'm guessing from looking at your Instagram, you have a big Bay Area audience. But I actually think the more fun night to come in is on a Thursday night, because it's less crowded. It's not crowded at all, and you'll get more personal attention. And we have guest winemakers, so you can try other wines, you can try our wines. So I think here at the winery is great. The website. I don't know anymore. I used to be able to name a couple of retailers. We had like a great retailer in Martha's Vineyard that literally carried everything we ever made.
Wow.
And I don't know if I've lost touch with them when I left the business, and I'll get back in touch with them. So I used to could say that. And I think the other thing is to have it at a restaurant. Like Rich Table has our hard pressed Ramada right now. Go to Rich Table and have like some fancy meal, but have that wine, because the wines are all, I think, better with food because of the acid. They play with the flavors of food and enhance them. People always talk about chef driven menus. And at some level, I think our wines are chef-driven wines. Like a lot of times, like we'll be introduced to a new restaurant, not by the the somm or the wine director, but by the chef who drinks the wine.
Okay.
He or she will like it with the food that they're eating.
That's great.
They're creating and they're eating.
Yeah.
So, and the only other thing I'll add is we're doing some exciting things too. Like we're going back to our old ways, but we're also doing some fun stuff. Like we have a collaboration with Sante Adarius Brewery, which we'll have releasing, I don't know when, because materials is with them and they say it's about ready. But we're also gonna, like, I don't want to be, I'm in my 50s. I don't want to be like a grumpy old man and only do the same things over and over again. I want to.
Is that a beer fermented with pomace or?
It is a beer with Ramato Pinot Gris. A co-ferment effectively.
Okay.
We will see if it's any. Yeah.
Yeah.
Might be interesting with that was an interesting taste. Thanks. Go on to something else. Or it might be great. I love her beers. So I'm excited for that. And then occasionally I've talked with a friend in Europe. We might be doing like we might import some wine from elsewhere that's made to our specification.
Okay. Interesting.
So it's another thing that we've been talking about.
How did you end up at Donkey and Goat?
So I grew up in Napa.
Okay.
My parents had a little like quarter acre, 150 vine vineyard in their backyard. So I had pictures of me like pruning vines and stomping grapes when I was pretty young. And before this, I was working in Napa for about 10 years. Went to Davis, did kind of the international harvest circuit that a lot of people do, and ended up back in Napa. And then my now wife got into a PhD program at Berkeley.
Okay.
So we moved here, and I was commuting to Napa every day. And I'd actually I think I first came to Donkey and Goat back in like 2013.
Okay.
When my wife first moved here.
Probably at the old space.
I think they had just come over here.
Oh,
It was over here.
Okay.
And so I'd known about them for a long time. And my last job at Napa, I started out kind of in the $300 bottle Napa cab game. They're very extracted, lots of oak, very alcoholic.
Yeah.
And then my last job in Napa was at RD Winery.
Okay.
And we were making our own wines, and it was owned by a Vietnamese company. So they were all meant to pair with Pan-Asian cuisine. And so we were doing like Gruner and Shannon and a lot of lighter, brighter, fresher stuff.
Yeah.
And then we were also doing a bunch of custom crush of like friends of mine that were winemakers in Napa that had their own brands. So like Carboniste was there, Bertus von Zyl with Belong it was there, Bardo Cider was there, Blair Guthrie of Guthrie Family Wines was there, Matt Nauman with Newfound was there. So I got to like I was making wine with all these guys and seeing their like kind of more minimal intervention side of things, and fell more and more in love with that. And so when something opened up here, it was just kind of a perfect fit of me wanting to head that direction and work with, different varietals from all over California. I've been working with a lot of the same vineyards that Donkey and Goat already worked with.
Okay.
Up in the foothills with Ron and Chuck Mansfield.
Oh, nice. That's great. Yeah.
So it was a pretty easy and seamless transition in that sense.
How would you describe your winemaking style?
It is pretty similar to, I do have a more conventional background than I think, but I definitely put myself in the minimal intervention camp. I think natural is a pretty fraught word at the moment.
Sure.
And my goal and aim overall is to make the best wine possible. And a wine that is, super VA ridden or mousy, I don't think really respects the vineyard or the fruit or the time and effort that everyone put into it. So my goal is always to make the best wine. And if that requires a little bit of intervention, I'm okay with that. So I think, 99% of the time we do next to nothing. And then when we do something, we tell you about it.
Yeah.
So we just want to our Amato Pinot Gris in 2021, right before bottling. And it got a little bit riper than we wanted on the vine. So right before bottling, labels already been printed. We were tasting it. We're like, this really needs acid. And it was like either make a wine that we're not as proud of or add tartaric acid. So we added the acid and actually went through with a little hand stamp and stamped every single label with tartaric acid on the back of it. So I think our goal is to be as honest about what we do as possible, but also to have people trust us to make the best wine possible whenever we can.
Mm-hmm. How have you kind of tweaked the winemaking process since you came on board?
I think my palate and Jared's were pretty darn similar to begin with. I mean, and like we like to drink a lot of the same wines, and so our goals were pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I've tweaked too much. I think it's more just been kind of tightening loose bolts here and there.
Okay.
And kind of bringing a little bit more consistency and just a little more structure to how the wine's made.
Okay.
But overall winemaking style, I think I've done very little.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've always liked about the Donkey and Goat wines is that I know they're made in a natural, minimal intervention style. They're always really clean, though.
My goal is that like you taste our wines and you don't even necessarily know that they're natural, or I want them to compete with all the other best wines out there. I still have so many friends that are winemakers elsewhere. My whole family's in the industry, so when I just told my parents I was coming here to make these wines, they thought I was a little crazy. Okay. And so I want to make wines that like they still like to drink and they'll enjoy, and my other friends that are the winemakers that they like and they want to drink. So it's always it's kind of the goal is to make really high quality wine, but just doing as little as possible.
Yeah. Jared mentioned you guys are kind of focusing the wines a little bit, maybe making less wines and looking at some different sources, also Lodi, and it seems like exciting. Probably you get to kind of do something here that hasn't been done here before, like brand new wines. There's no template or anything for how they have to be made or have been made in the past.
Yeah, I think, so we're doing kind of two different things. One is focusing the SKUs a little bit. So really, because we had gotten where we're making like 30 different wines and it's a little ridiculous. So focusing just on the ones that we really love and the vineyards that we really love. That's definitely part of it. So kind of going back to some of the Donkey and Goat classics. And then the second part of that is also finding some new vineyard sources, in Lodi and stuff, just so that we can create some lower cost products.
Okay.
Because I think it's really important for us to, have an under $25 bottle value, organically grown wine that is naturally made. And it's pretty darn tough to do COGS wise.
Yeah.
So we had to hunt and search and really work hard to like kind of keep our costs low enough that we could make that kind of offering. But yeah, and so 3 wines I'm probably most excited about that are all new ones are 3 Italian whites that we're doing. So we're doing Falangina, Greco, and Fiano.
Oh, nice.
And those are all things that, I think work really well in the California climate. It can be, 13.5% alcohol and still have ripping acidity.
Yeah.
So they just do great here. Actually, in this past year where it was pretty cold, I had the opposite issue of like them not wanting, like waiting for the acid to go away because they just wouldn't ripen.
Yeah. So are they from like Clarksburg?
So the Falangina is San Benito. San Benito. It's Soleto Vineyard.
Okay. Awesome.
Well, it's technically Calari, but it's farmed by Nat Wong and the Soletos.
Right. Okay.
And then the Greco and Fiano are from Mokomi River.
Okay.
And Jake DeVoings, I probably just butchered his last name, but he farms those.
Okay.
Really cool spot out there.
Nice.
And Soleto's just got certified organic in 2023. And Jake actually replanted his wife's parents' old property. That was first planted in the 80s. And that has never seen synthetic anything. So that's wow. He's practiced organic, but it's not certified, but it's also a really cool vineyard out there.
Very cool. Any new reds that you're working with?
We got Nero de Avila from Jake as well, but it's a monster. It's extremely tannic.
Okay.
So it doesn't quite work with like a lot of what we're doing. So that was a fun experiment. I might get some Valdegay. I'm kind of keeping my ears open for next year, but so always, kind of playing and seeing what's out there. But yeah.
Nice.
We're starting to farm a little Pinot vineyard out in Sebastopol this year that we're taking over for the first time. So that's going to be a fun little project that of to get me out there, and we'll have the whole team at Donkey and Go out to help prune and do all the vineyard work and then pick the fruit itself. So
yeah, nice. Kind of get everybody involved and see the process.
It's just under an acre, so it's like kind of perfect for that. But yeah, it gets everybody to get to see what the process start to finish.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that you were able to find something that just kind of like fit the size that works for the winery and that works for you guys also, since you have to be going up there and farming it. I guess you helped your parents farm the vineyard probably a little bit growing up. I know you said pruning at the age of 4 and stuff, but
I don't have that much like real world farming experience. So I've been calling a lot of friends that do that full time and taking them out to lunch and picking their brains on especially with how much powdery mildew pressure and stuff there is out there. But it's we're farming it organically. It's gonna be pretty simple. Just doing stylet oil and maybe oxidate, but it's so it's just getting a lot of compost out there and just staying on top of the sprays, I think, is going to be the name of the game.
Pretty great Pinot that comes from out there, so it seems exciting.
Fingers crossed. We're hoping it's gonna turn out well.
Yeah.
We tried to get the fruit this year with and the powdery mildew was just so bad. There was completely decimated the crop. There's nothing there. But from what I've heard from other people, that was pretty consistent across the board. It was a bad year for powdery mildew.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, almost everybody kind of said. So I think with 2023, like that was the issue, or the people dealing with that year. Did you guys have issues with any of your other vineyards that you work with?
Everything else is pretty clean.
Okay.
I think most of the issues, it was just such a cold year, and things were pretty heavily cropped. So I think things just took so long to ripen. That was kind of more the issue. And coming off of a couple of bad years in the foothills, I think growers wanted to like get as much as they could out of the vines, and so it was like a little bit of a balancing act of hanging in a decent amount of fruit and trying to get that all to ripen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it'd probably been a couple years since you guys really got much of a crop from the foothills vineyards, the El Dorado vineyards.
19 was the last like good harvest out of there for us.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been a couple years coming.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm happy for Chuck and Ron and Gold, but everything turned out okay.
Yeah. What they've been through in the past couple of years, I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And like just their resiliency and the fact that they're just keep doing it is pretty amazing. And with a good attitude,
Yeah.
So it's, I'm sending lots of good luck their way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What else you guys have planned for the future?
I mean, because we're in the middle of a pretty big transition period. And so it's just, I think, kind of hunkering down and cutting a little bit of the fat and just focusing on what we want the brand to be and kind of getting back to what Donkey and Goat was. So, I think we're spending 2023 and 2024 really just focusing on what's important and getting rid of everything else. So just taking that time to reflect and cut SKUs and kind of cut costs where we can and really say what makes this a special place and do those things better.
Awesome.
So my job here is pretty simple. Just they've created such a unique thing and a unique culture and, have been doing it for so long. And my job's just to not mess it up. And so keep making good wine and, try and keep the brand happy and healthy and serving, being a part of the community.
Thanks for listening today to our conversation with Jared and Connor. Things were a lot different in California wine when Donkey and Goat got started 20 years ago. The wines are tasting as good as ever, and it'll be fun to watch the further evolution of the winery. There really is a great community in this Gilman wine district that has grown up around them. Just stop on by and check it out. They have a First Fridays event, and on March 7th, you have a chance to try the wine Jared made when he was away from Donkey and Goat, a Chardonnay, Greco, and Fiano blend. Should be fun to try. You can find the wines at donkeyandgoat.com and follow what else they're up to on Instagram at donkeyandgoat. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you can tell your wine friends about the podcast too, even just one, and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too, of course. There's also a Patreon to support the podcast monetarily to allow for more episodes and to help defray other costs. The link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.